25%. Is that because the state gets money from the federal government and then distributes it, or is that just because is that specific to the state's financial health?
So we have, for example, local grants is primarily from TDA. So what happened at the FY25 is because our operating expenditures were less than what we had programmed or we had available, we actually programmed close to $6 million for capital, for future capital costs. So every year, SANDAC provides an estimate of funding that you have under these funding sources, and you earmark some funds for operations. When your operating costs end up being lower than your actual costs, you have two options. You have to either, I would say, return the money, but you have to return the money, or because your expenses were lower, or you reprogram those for capital. So what NCD does, because you will soon see our CIP presentation, we have more capital needs than we have funding available. And local match is needed for the most part. Anytime you get a discretionary grant from the federal government, you have to have local match available to be able to match those grants. So what we did for FY25, because we had those savings, that $6 million that originally was purposed for local, we are moving that to capital so we can fund our future capital needs.
Yeah, I would say, to build on that a little bit, one thing that we are a little bit concerned about is the state's programmatical sort of hierarchy of how they distribute funding. I think we saw a little bit of that with SB 125, where it was outlined for a certain period of time, and then there was a change by the state to potentially pull some of that back through the legislature or through the governor's office. And that eventually got changed based on revenues that came into the state. But the state revenues are problematic. And I think, to your point, they do rely, I don't say heavily, but there is a fair amount of federal influence on state grants, especially as it relates to transportation. And so some of the programs that exist at the state level that are pulled through TDA or gas tax or other funds are also supplemented by funds that come from the federal government. And when some of those don't quite match in Sacramento, there are changes that are made to the state budget which have direct impacts on state of good repair money that we would have, or certain legislative agendas that get passed for a specific funding amount, but that funding amount doesn't sort of manifest itself in the revenue year. So we're keeping a close eye on that one.
Thank you, Bob.
And then from the operating standpoint, as you can see, for the most part, our salaries, wages, and benefits and professional services and materials, which includes fuel, were those expenditures that were under budget. However, we had more expenses on the purchase transportation. If you remember, before the insourcing of bus operations and maintenance was outsourced to MV, and the wages, for the most part, paid to bus operators. Overtime is part of it, caused the purchase transportation to be over budget. However, overall, district-wide, our expenses were under budget by about $50 million. And then this shows our net position. The net position shows the balance sheet, or where we are in other district. So we had cash and investments, like I said earlier, about $99 million. The rest is under restricted assets, under current assets. And then we have also had liabilities, accounts payable, $53 million. The difference between the current assets and total current liabilities, as you can see, is over $100 million. That is your working capital. You have much more. You have enough current assets to meet your current obligations. Pension liability, which you will see in the next presentation, as of June 30th, our pension liability remains fairly constant in the last 3 fiscal years, which was about $43 million at the end of FY25. We have a positive net position. $770 million is our net position, but that includes the unrestricted and the investment capital assets. And then overall, the district still had a positive net position. So we did not really have yet a deficit. And then fare box recovery. So when we think about fare box recovery, the straight formula is fare revenues divided by operating expenses. So overall, our fare box recovery district-wide is less than what is required by the state. Under TDA, NCTD needs to meet a minimum fare box recovery ratio for paratransit service versus fixed route. That ratio is 18.8% for fixed service and 10% is for paratransit. However, under the state, and it's a minimum ratio that has to be met in order for NCTD to receive TDA funding. However, NCTD is allowed under the CPUC code to supplement fares with other sources of revenue to meet the minimum ratio. Those funding sources are internally generated income by the district. That can include investment income. It can also include licenses fees. It can also include advertising revenues. But most importantly, one of the main sources of revenue region-wide that supplements local fares is Transnet. Under the Transnet ordinance, there was, the voters agreed to pass among different projects. They also agreed to pass Transnet for reduced fares for youth and seniors. As you know, seniors in the region and youth in the region pay fares that is, I think, 66% lower than adult fares. But because that Transnet revenue was passed in order to subsidize transit and also to subsidize those reduced fares, we can incorporate that as part of the fare box recovery formula. So under that scenario, NCTD is able to meet the minimum required by the state. So fiscal year 2025, our ratio is about 30% versus the 18.8% required by TDA. So under that scenario, NCTD is able to meet the minimum. So that is a summary of our fiscal year 2025 financial numbers. So if you have any questions, I'm glad to answer those.
Thank you, Ian. Do any of my colleagues have any questions at this time?
I do, and this may not be for Yoon, but for Sean or, okay, Misty, you're on the spot now. No. There's been talk over time about adjusting the TDA numbers. Is there any forward progress on making that happen?
We've had conversations about that internally and sort of what direction we want to go. I think probably the bigger issue is any adjustments we would make to that may not be the solution to all of our problems. I think long-term, we probably need to find some additional funding sources that'll supplement any adjustments that we make. I think the budget sort of reflects a few different things when you look at it. Like before, when we had the conversation about the two different buckets that exist, we had like one for operating and one for capital. And so a lot of times when we're under budget for the year, it's directly related to some of the CIP projects that we had to either push into the next year or we're still working on a little bit. Purchase transportation was a big piece of that. We're really interested to see how much headway we can make by bringing some of those back in-house. But that conversation is still happening on the regular. I think it's one piece for us of a bigger problem that we think we're going to have, which is what additional funding sources do we need long-term to be able to expand frequency, to be able to do those things. So, Coaster, interestingly enough, is primarily paid for by the run. We have a specific revenue and expense generator for that. So when we add trips onto Coaster, or we have an agreement essentially that says we will run X amount of trips on Coaster, so we're okay there for now. It really probably is bus service and Sprinter operations that we need to look for that next funding source. And hope that the Coaster funding holds out. Is there anybody in the crowd that can help us with that? Sandag?
Any other questions?
No, thank you. And thank you, Sean.
Committee member, Harris.
Yes, thank you so much for the presentation, and thank you, everybody, for helping us stay in compliance. I have three questions. And just out of curiosity, when we're looking at the cash levels for operation and the minimum threshold being 15K, and we're significantly over that, but what does that translate to? Just out of curiosity, when we're looking at the cash levels for operation.
The cash is comprised of not just cash for operations, but we also get advances. Not from the federal government, but mostly from the state and local level. So for fiscal year 2025, even if the cash looks high, it doesn't necessarily mean that's available for operations. Because we received quite a bit, over $70 million under TRCP and ZCTP funds for the district. That money is restricted for use for capital projects. Some of the big capital projects are we using that fund is going to be the convention, not the convention, but the new platform at the demonstration for the San Diego double track project. Also, we also have some money that is restricted for maintenance costs. Some of them is restricted for zero emission type of projects. So yes, cash may look high, but it's not necessarily available for operations. With that said, the board has determined that we need at least to have a $50 million reserve in order to cover any unforeseen costs. We have some grants on reimbursement basis, so typically, even if you have expenditures every month, we do the drawdowns with the FTA, so we get reimbursed and the bank account is replenished. But the board has determined we have to have at least 15 as a minimum, for any.
And for the $15 million figure, I'm just curious, why, is that still a good threshold? Do we need to increase that threshold? Is that a part of the conversation that has happened? I'm just not, I'm new to this committee, so I don't know the nuances of that.
Yeah, I would say historically where that number came from was if there were issues with the federal government or at the state level where they weren't able to pay us, we were able to continue operations for 90 days. So it's always kind of that 90-day to six, every organization is a little different, but it's either like 90-day or 6-month threshold of being able to continue operations and make payroll without having to do that. I do think that number's probably worth a reevaluation.
That's what I was wondering, because it
15
seems
for-
fairly
Yeah,
low.
we can reevaluate and increase the limit, but at the end of the day, it doesn't change reality, right?
Right,
It's
right.
almost like you set up a target, but it won't bring any more cash to the district.
Right, yeah,
So
and,
what you have to do in that case is potentially, the district has never had the need, at least in the last 9 years, to have access to a line of credit. So it's something that maybe we can explore, right? If we have a minimal cash balance, or we don't meet that minimal cash balance, but we don't have the cash, then you have to recur to credit, right? To bring that cash in the books. So I think that, currently, based on our financial, situation, there's no need yet, because when you have a line of credit, even if you don't use it, you still have to pay a fee, right? Because the bank is making that cash available. Some banks might charge you like 1%, 0.5%, so you may be paying for something that you're not using. But I think that depending on how the financial situation, transpires in the next month, years, not just for NCDD, but
Right.
agencies, we may have to explore potentially getting access.
so I'm really glad that I asked this question, because I didn't know that it would go into this direction, but I really appreciate all the information. And, we have a federal government that we cannot rely on, and we have a state government that is really stretched. So I think that it would be best practice for us to reevaluate the floor, and understanding that we probably, there's no need right now, we're in a good financial situation, so there's no need for that plan, C or D. But I think if we can get in front of any of these big economic headwinds that we're starting to see, not just here in the United States, but throughout the entire world, it would be good to plan for an emergency just in case. And so I think it's just a good exercise to do, especially just because we want to have, I would say, at least 6 months versus 90 days. So, and I don't even know what the nuances of that are, but I want to be able to have this discussion and really take a look at those nuances. So thank you so much. My second question is on the purchase transportation. You mentioned overtime. So seeing that this is over budget, how does this affect the district?
Well, I think the purchase transportation piece was specific to a contract. We made some amendments to that during the pandemic that were probably not advantageous to the agency. I think when we were, I think our goal was to try to protect service as much as possible, and I think our purchase transportation providers were pretty honest with us that that is very difficult to do, bringing new people in the door during the pandemic. So they were essentially paying their employees to come in and work a significant amount of overtime, and rightfully so. They probably should have done that, but those pass-throughs were never changed, and so we essentially have a quarterly audit. We did have a quarterly audit with the purchase transportation provider, and what we found almost repeatedly was a lot of these add-ons, scope creep on things that sort of got pulled in and we had to pay them for just to sort of manage the service. And I think Our goal, pulling that back in-house, was to try to minimize that as much as possible. I mean, we know there's overtime built into the schedule. That's going to happen all the time. We know people are going to need to take off, and so but I think our direct management of those things are going to eventually see some headway. I mean, we've only been at it now about 5 months, and we've already seen some pretty decent improvements in that and some quality of life improvements for our employees. And so we're going to keep poking away at that. But I always think that's the danger with purchase transportation is, you know, they're passing through the cost directly to you, and they are a for-profit agency. And so that's always a difficult space to be.
That's a new word for me, scope creep, and I like it. It's like the, you know, lifestyle creep situation. So I would just like to kind of have a pulse on this and see what the difference is, since, you know, after we see more time where we have insourced everything, and just to see what the difference is on that overtime piece. Totally valid that sometimes we're going to need overtime, but kind of, I do worry a little bit about this number being so high.
Yeah, part of that too, and I think you alluded to it a little bit, was because 2020, fiscal year 2025, we knew we set the target date to be at the end of that. We had some closeout items with the contractor that we probably normally wouldn't have had in that year. So we had to reconcile a fair amount of things that probably wouldn't have happened. We've actually had a little bit of that has fallen into fiscal year 26. But once all that's closed out and that's directly in our hands, we're going to really better be able to manage liability insurance, because we'll have direct access to it. Our employee health insurance benefits, hopefully through the state. You know, the big piece of that is we essentially took the profit from the Purchase Transportation Agency, and we're putting that into essentially the state retirement program. So that piece is kind of.
Yeah, and I saw, you know, one of your updates come through, and I haven't had a chance to read it, but I'm curious if this is something that you could update the board. It's just letting us know when this is going to completely, you know, fall off, because I just think it's important for the agency. Third has to do with TDA. You know, great that we're able to augment the percentage, but what would it look like if we just looked purely at fare box recovery? And you don't have to answer that now, but I would love to also have that number, because I don't know what it is, and I would assume, and I don't like to make assumptions, but I would assume that it's fairly low, but I have no idea what the ballpark is.
I would say,
It's about 10%.
yeah, it's about 10%. I would say you and I share the thought that it's not enough. It should be higher. I would also note that in comparison to some of our peers in the industry, we're actually doing okay. I think there was a pretty giant reluctancy in the late aughts to increase fares related to public transit. Like, public transit fares are sort of like milk, like the inflation on it has just not taken off like it should have. And so I think when we think about that, we want to make sure that we have a service that's available to the public and people can use.
This is a lifeline for the public. And so, but one of the things that I am curious to see, especially as we compare to other agencies, is maybe just for the more knowledge that we have, the better decisions we can make. And we may have to make some really difficult decisions. Maybe some of us won't be here. Maybe all of us will be here. Who knows? But if we can start to understand that piece as elected officials that aren't totally in the know about all these like really detailed aspects of it, I would love to see what that pure number is.
The biggest shocker that usually catches people off guard is our ADA services. Usually for almost every agency encompass less than 1% of our ridership, but usually cover about 20% of our operating costs. And we know that's a needed service to the community, but like to your point, when you break it down like that, and you see where sort of those monies are going, you're like, oh, okay, what can we do to shift gears a little bit? And I think you'll hear a little bit about that in the fare study that we're going to chat about later today.
And also in our annual comprehensive financial report every year, there is a section at the back called the statistical section. That number is shown in there. So when you see the fare revenue to operating cost ratio, you'll see what that number is. varies. It's a little bit low, I think this year's gonna be a little lower than 10%. It's about 9.5, 9% for the system-wide, but it is included in our audited financials every year.
Yeah, it's good to know the extent of what that number actually is, what it means in the context of it. So I appreciate this discussion. Thank you so much. Those are all my questions.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Okay, and so before we move on to agenda item number 2, Taylor, do we have any public comments on this item?
No, we do not.
Great. Okay, that takes us to agenda item number 2, which is going to be an update on NCTD's pension liability report. And our Chief Financial Officer, Park Lynch, is going to give us an update.
I'll provide a quick update on the financials, but I'm going to retract just a couple of slides so you can see where that number is reflected on our financial statements. So here on the balance sheet on June 30, 2025, under the bottom 1/3 section, you will see that net pension liability of $42.9 million. That will be the subject of my presentation for item number 2. See that for 42,969,550. So what is the pension liability? The pension liability is the obligation that the district has to pay for future benefits for employees that have already earned it. It is an accrual. So if as employees are having service credits and within the defined benefit plan, it promises a future pension, that creates a liability. That creates an obligation for the district to pay those future benefits. When our pension, the pension liability is funded for the most part. It's about 73%, I think, June 30, 2025. That means that funding has been set aside with CalPERS. We remit the funds to CalPERS. CalPERS actually manages those investments. So those funds are set aside in order to be able to pay for those future benefits. When the assets are less than the liability, meaning that the assets are not sufficient to cover those future benefits, that's what's considered a net pension liability. When the assets are higher, that means that investments that exist in CalPERS to pay for those future benefits are higher than those future obligations. That creates an asset. As you can see on our financial statements, NCD has a net pension liability, meaning that the obligations that we have for those future benefits exceed the investments that exist in CalPERS. For the most part, I would say probably, I don't want to say 100%, but probably 90% plus of agencies currently are on an unfunded status. It means that they're not fully funded for their pension obligations. The CalPERS pension valuation is prepared externally by CalPERS every year. It's always 1 year in arrears, meaning that the financial presentation that you will see today was based on census data as of June 30, 2024. So when you see the audit financial statement for 2026, that will be based on the census for 2025. So why is this important? This is important because on June of 2025, we brought in close to over 400 new employees at the district for BAS operations. So the numbers that you see here does not reflect those new employees. The numbers that you see here reflect the number of employees that we had in June of 2024. It won't be until probably June fiscal year 2027 that you'll be able to see the full picture of what the insourcing for BAS operations is reflected. Overall, there was no change on the discount rate from CalPERS for the evaluation of our pension. Why is discount rate very important? Because discount rate determines, among other assumptions, on what that liability looks like. So CalPERS makes assumptions related to mortality rates, inflation, and also discount rates. When the discount rate is higher, your pension liability is lower. When your discount is lower, your pension liability is higher. So I'll show you what that means. In the ideal world, you will hope that your investment return matches very close to your discount rate, right? Because you want that investment return to not only cover the growth on your payroll, you also want to be able to call those future benefits. So if there is in the future a situation where investment returns are not sufficient to cover the pension liability and CalPERS changes the discount rate, it will have a huge financial impact for the district because our pension liability will be reflected higher in our books, which means that we'll have to also pay more every year in our contributions. So I'll show more in the next slide what that means from a financial standpoint. This would not be unique to the district because when CalPERS apply the discount rate, they apply across all agencies that are under the CalPERS plan. So this is just a quick recap of what were the covered employees as of June 30th, 2024. As you can see, fairly similar to June 2023. It does not cover our current employee roster for bus operators. So when you get the next pension evaluation report that includes the bus operators, that active employees will be close to probably 800 plus employees. Right now, it's still showing that 337, and that was reflected because of the insourcing. If you remember, we insourced rail operations in 2022, then we insourced maintenance away, maintenance facilities, so that's why you see that number, going higher from 2020 to 2024. That's a reflection of the insourcing activity that NCT has had in the last few years. So this is a quick recap of what our pension liability looked like for the last 5 years. The first column, 2024, is the most recent valuation report that was done by CalPERS. Our pension liability is $42.9 million, which we are about 74% funded. So that's very similar to what we had the prior years. In years where investment return, when the market does really, really well, that was a 2021, your plan assets grow, right? So your plan asset grows, you look like you're more funded. But if the market turns around and your investments drop, then your funded status drops. So you can kind of see why you had that spike in 2021. It was almost like coming right off COVID. If you remember, it was the market had these huge returns, so that way it looks like you had a higher funded status. Then things kind of level down, the market comes down, then your funded status comes down.
We'll mark that in the audit.
So this is why the discount rate is so important. The discount rate determines on how CalPERS calculates a pension liability. When the discount rate goes higher, your pension liability drops. When the discount is lower, your pension liability comes down. There was a point in time where CalPERS used a discount rate of, I think it was 8.5 or 8.75% for pension liabilities. So that created a little bit of, not misleading, but the market was not able to return that return to the investments. So they have been lowering the discount rate, and that's why agencies have now how to kind of cover that gap, because the market, the plan assets are not sufficient to cover those benefits. So right now it's 6.9%. If CalPERS for some reason came next year, hypothetically, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but if for some reason they decided to change our discount rate from 6.9 to 5.9%, which is only 1%, it means that our liability just grew up by $18.5 million. So that is why discount rate can have a huge effect, because under the law, agencies are required to fund their plan, right? So when your pension liability is higher, then you have to put more money in the plan to cover the gap. That's what the sensitivity analysis means. What will be the impact to our plan if there was a change in that discount rate? So just as a key recap, the pension employer contributions are composed of two components. One of them is the one that's paid along the payroll every month. NCT contributes between 8 and 9% our payroll costs every pay period as part of the employer contributions towards the plan. But there's also what's called the unfunded accrued liability payment. That's the gap. That's the gap between what you should have in the plan but you don't have. So NCT every year has to pay not only what we fund through our regular payroll, we also have to make additional contributions towards the plan. This year, I think it was close to $4 million that we had to pay. When we have excess cash, we have also made additional contributions in order to have some savings on an interest cost. So these are total unfunded accrued liability contribution payments. These are payments that we make to the plan in addition to those contributions that we make to payroll. So for fiscal year 2025, we paid $4.6 million towards the plan. 3.5 was the minimum required. $1.1 million was the additional payment. For fiscal year 2026, we only paid the minimum of $4 million. And then for fiscal year 2027, we may pay additional funding at our discretion. The $1.5 million is discretionary for NCTD in order to increase our funded status for the plan. The mandatory is the one that you see in the first column. The second column is discretionary to NCTD. So that concludes my presentation. I know there's a lot of numbers, but I'll be glad.
Thanks
to
for
answer any
thank you for the
questions.
presentation, Yoon. Taylor, do we have any public speakers on this item?
No, we do not.
Great. Do any of my colleagues have any questions? I don't see any. Okay. Oh, please.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much. Just a quick question. So I'm sorry, I'm not understanding this part. So when we're looking at the market dynamics and we look at the discount rate, is it like a 1-for-1 or?
It is an anticipated rate of return over a period of time, because markets go up and down, but
Right.
over the period of time, you will expect that rate or to be very close to the market returns. So when market returns don't materialize, there was a point in time, if everyone remembers, in the early 90s with the tech boom and the dot-com era, where a lot of promises were made by government agencies on these pensions because the market was returning high returns. What happened is, as time goes by, the market cannot return 20% or 50% the way in the assumptions. So then CalPERS makes a forecast, determines what is a reasonable rate of return for the marketplace. The last few years, we have seen, for the most part, that 7%, something that may be a little bit still aggressive. But if for some reason, yes, the market is a downturn, there's a forecast in downturn, then they change the discount rate. That means that our liability will go up, which means that now the district has to put more money into the plan to get that funded status.
Right.
higher.
Yeah, I was just curious of how the market dynamic affects the discount rate. And so that's very helpful. And then you brought up the tech boom, but a lot of people are making comparisons right now of the times that we're in with these market dynamics and the fundamentals being just kind of not easy to understand with the reality of folks' lived experiences and what we're seeing. So I'm hoping it doesn't materialize the same way, but thanks for the overview. That it's very helpful.
I think we're putting it all in crypto.
Great, great. Any other questions or comments?
Maybe just a brief comment that this is always frustrating because no matter what we do, it all depends on what CalPERS does. And we could pay off our entire pension liability, but still be in the hole next year if they change the rate, so discount rate.
Great, well, thank you again, Yoon. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, and there's no vote on this item, it's just informational. The next item on the agenda will be an update on the development of the fiscal year 2027 to 2031 capital improvement program. Justin Richardson, our Chief Development Officer, and Ornella Robert, Manager of Project Delivery, will present on this item. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to present here today. Stated, I'm Justin Richardson. I'm the Deputy Chief Development Technology Officer. This is Ms. Nellie Robert. She is our Manager for Project Delivery. We are here to give this committee an overview of where we are in the development of our FY 27 through 31 capital improvement program. And with that, I'll give it over to Nellie, who will walk us through.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you again for the opportunity to present today. Over the past several months, the project delivery team has worked in close coordination with all of the divisions across the entire district to identify capital needs, review asset conditions, validate cost and schedule assumptions, and determine funding eligibility. We've also taken a much closer look at project readiness, regulatory requirements, and long-term life cycle replacement needs in order to structure an initial CIP that not only aligns with the funding opportunities, but also responsive to the operational readiness. The presentation that you'll see today reflects the intensive collaborative effort, because I like to say that the CIP is a very short 3-letter word, but it is an immense collaborative effort. And it definitely, this presentation today sets the stage for the board approval this coming Thursday. The Capital Improvement Program is North County Transit's planning tool for identifying, prioritizing, and funding the capital investments required to maintain safe and reliable transit operations. It covers infrastructure, fleet, facilities, and technology across the entire district. We update the CIP on an annual basis, at a minimum on an annual basis, in order to reflect current asset conditions, emerging risks, and available funding. This helps us stay proactive rather than being reactive as any issues may arise. And also with every single annual update, the project delivery team works very closely with the divisions to evaluate readiness, the funding sources available, and scheduling to ensure alignment with federal and state regulations and also the board's direction. I'm a very visual person, so I've created this very aesthetically pleasing slide here right now that that outlines what I like to call the first phase of our CIP development. As you can see here on the slide, our kickoff commenced in August of 2025. Then we further transitioned into our development phase, in which the different divisions submitted ideas. They submitted their target schedules and their funding requests tied to their capital project ideas. Then the project delivery team evaluated all of that information and collaborated with finance along with our capital program steering committee in order to formulate and prioritize what we like to call our constrained list of projects for this CIP cycle. Where we are today right now is the fourth little box you see on the screen, which is the PAF committee. So again, thank you for having us here today. And this coming Thursday, we will have the board approval of the initial CIP. So the CIP outlines the major steps in our, there are major steps in our CIP process, which you can see here on this slide deck. In order to consider a project for readiness, it has to have specific benefits to the idea. It has to be consistent with our TAM plan. The question that we also like to ask ourselves is, where is it in its life cycle? Is it about to meet the end of its useful life? Does it need to be replaced? And if so, what's the criticality on it? Is this conceptual idea previously funded by a contract? If so, does it need additional funding in the future CIP in order to continue with said project? Is it mandated by regulation? Does it meet our North Star strategic alignment? And does the project funding and procurement all align together in order to package and deliver a project that can actually be executed and completed on time? As you can see on this slide deck, there are a various amount of funding sources that fund our projects, to include the FTA formula funds. We have our state transit assistant funds, as well as our TDA funds, and then we also have our discretionary grant funding. It's also super important to understand all of the requirements that come associated with these funding sources. Specific ones do require, they must adhere to a specific schedule and or a specific scope. And so it's very important to know what these requirements are in order to execute projects in that timely manner and using that specific scope. Now we get on to the good stuff, the information here. So what you see on the slide deck here is our constrained CIP. Our constrained CIP is limited by funding available. It includes all of our prioritized projects only, which has been vouched by our capital program steering committee and ranked from 1 through end. It balances the needs with financial capacity. And in total, our constrained CIP for FY27 is approximately $51 million. There are 13 ongoing projects, and a question that you may ask yourself is, well, what does ongoing mean? It means that the period of performance started in a previous fiscal year, and the period of performance is carrying on through the following FY27 CIP cycle. So it will require additional funding to advance that work. So those must get funded. And that totals about $8.1 million. Our high priority projects are the projects that were prioritized from 1 through N from our capital program steering committee. We did take input from the public, and then as well as looking at all of our assets. We met several times with our capital program steering committee to ensure that we have captured every single idea that was submitted through the district. In total, there are 35, which total $43 million. Primarily, they are state of good repair projects. The next following slides are examples of those high priority projects and their total dollar amounts. So for Sprinter overhauls, we have $7.3 million. Coaster overhauls, 8.5. We have wayfinding and signage under our state of good repair for $3.3 million. BOE and BOW pavement construction is 1.8. Our beloved coaster train wash, which we need, is $2.3 million. And then we also move forward into our rail infrastructure and signal state of good repair. Rose Canyon Bridge replacement design and construction is $12.5 million. Bridge 209.9, which will advance to construction, is about $900,000. And under safety and regulatory compliance, we have Grand Avenue and Carlsbad Village Drive grade crossing safety enhancements and construction, which is $1.5 million. And then we also have the gas detection BOE body shop design and construction for about $800,000. Those are just a few of the example projects that are on our high priority list. After the board's initial approval this coming Thursday, we will move on to phase 2, which is what I like to call our refinement period, where the project delivery team works in close coordination once more with all of the divisions in the district in order to ensure that the high priority projects and ongoing projects meet the schedule and the funding requirements in order to continue advancement. We want to maximize the amount of funds that are available to the district, that we use them in a timely manner, and that these projects can actually start and end within that time frame. We will complete the refinement process in May of 2026, and then we will move forward for the final board approval come this June of 2026. And that concludes my presentation. I am more than happy to take any questions that the board may have.
Well, thank you both for the presentation. Very helpful. Taylor, do we have any public comments on this item?
No, we do not.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments from my colleagues? Yes, Committee Member Pat Patel.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the presentation, and it looks like we are very busy with a lot of different items. Couple of questions. One, with regards to Grand and Carlsbad Village Drive, I just wanted to confirm this is the conversation that we've been having with the community. Mr. Donaghy, I know it's come up quite a few times, so I just wanted to make sure because I know you've been a part of those conversations as well.
Yeah, it's part of it. I think we've had a plan at Carlsbad Village for a while. I think a lot of the community input that we've received will be incorporated, and we did change a little bit of this project in relation to some of the feedback that we received, specific at the crossings themselves, especially adjacent to the transit center, some of the walk around from the bus platform. One of the pieces that we already did was we welded the gate shut at Carlsbad Village Station so people couldn't directly cross the station while we had Amtrak coming through at a pretty decent rate of speed. And that seems to have deterred a lot of cross traffic on the rail. They do have to sort of walk around now, and the piece that we're really working through is how would they be able to access the track beyond the drop downs, beyond the crossings themselves into sort of areas adjacent to the track. And I think that's part of what we're trying to address here. I think our MOW and MOS team have done a good job putting a plan together with our DSD department.
Can you elaborate on those acronyms you just used?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, so our maintenance of signal and maintenance away team, they're the ones
Thank you.
that primarily work on the track. Sorry about that. I get all wrapped up in
It's
my-
okay. I
my
know
off
them,
self.
but I want to make sure that everyone else that's listening.
Yeah, and
also
they've
gets
had a lot
chance
of
to-
great ideas on how to sort of manage a lot of those intersections, specifically in about that 2-mile section of track. And our development services team has worked hard with our rail team to make sure that we've got a good plan when we get into it. It's sort of phased in a little bit because we had a couple that were not really safety issues, but areas of opportunity for us to reduce liability. And so Lori's safety team really did a good job of sort of pinpointing those areas, and we were able to break it up into pieces to do some of them early. But the big piece is coming in the next year or two here, so.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, I'm glad to see it on there, and I know we've been working on it, so this is good news. In terms of the timing with regards to this coming back, I'm just confirming that it generally comes back around budget adoption time, so I'm assuming that's why that June timeframe, just so that we can line it up with whatever is being allocated towards it.
Correct, yes.
Great. Okay, those are my questions. Thanks.
Yes, Arnelia, can you remind me where the location of Bridge 209.9 is Trick question.
That is a very trick question.
I
Yeah,
thought so.
209
It's
is
on Camp
Should I-
Pendleton,
CP
sorry, I had to
songs.
refer.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's the CP songs on Camp Pendleton.
thank you. I thought so, but I just wanted to.
I was
make
waiting
sure.
for Justin to jump in there.
Trying to say how to say that.
Oh,
Oh, you mean the acronym?
song.
Yeah, it's our control point, right around Camp Pendleton, near Stewart Mesa.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, great,
There's one thing that I did want to mention, sorry
Okay.
if I can just go back.
absolutely.
So as you can see here on this slide, we do have 35 high priority projects. I did want to mention that there are X amount of those. The reason being is we don't want to limit ourselves. We don't want to enclose ourselves in a small box where we can't execute more projects as funding becomes available. We want to be proactive and ready to go with these high priority identified projects. So when funding does become available, even with savings, as you can explain, we're ready to go and we're ready to execute.
So these are all shovel ready, is what you're saying?
Yes, ma'am.
Got it.
Great, well, thank you again. Moving right along onto item 4, our next item on the agenda will be an update on the status of the transit fare change study. Mary Dover, our Chief of Staff, and Tim Garrett, Associate Regional Planner with Sandag, will present this item.
Thank you, members of the committee. So Yoon and Sean did a really good job of scaring you about our financial position. So Tim and I are here to talk about one way that we're trying to make it a little bit better. So as you've heard, NCTD and MTS are facing some challenging financial outlook in the coming years. So we're looking at all possible avenues to try to increase revenues across the board. And one way to do that is by increasing fare revenue. In order for us to increase fare revenue, we have to work with Sandag to approve changes to the regional fare ordinance. So Tim and some other Sandag folks are here that can answer any questions that you may have about the fare study. So fare revenue is actually a really flexible spending source. We can utilize that for operations, fuel, electricity costs, as Nellie was mentioning, some costs that aren't eligible for some of the state or federal funding sources. Sandag, as I mentioned, is the administrator of our regional fare ordinance, and so we're working with them. But they also have a really robust data analytics and modeling team, so they're helping us with the study. So these are NCTD's current fares. We don't have a lot of flexibility to change our fares, and we aren't as nimble as we would like to be in some instances. So we actually haven't made substantive changes to the fares in recent years. In 2019, we changed the coaster one-way fares and day pass fares. But prior to that, in 2008 was the last time that our monthly fares were substantively changed. So as we had mentioned, due to inflation, we're due to reevaluate some of these fares. In 2022, NCTD and MTS, in partnership with Sandag and the County of San Diego, also implemented the Youth Opportunity Pass program. So all fares for youth 18 and under are free. I haven't reflected them here. If a youth doesn't have the Youth Opportunity Pass, they'll effectively pay the same thing as this senior disabled Medicare fare. NCTD's Breeze and Sprinter fares are in line with MTS's bus and trolley fares. They are the regional flat one-way fare, and that's the metric that we use to base our paratransit and our flex service fares. So flex is a little bit more expensive because it allows passengers to deviate from the route within a defined zone. So we charge double. And Coaster has 3 zones. Coaster from Oceanside to Solana Beach is in Zone 1, Sereno Valley is Zone 2, and Old Town and Santa Fe are Zone 3. So for somebody that's going from Oceanside down to Santa Fe, they would pay that 3-zone fare and vice versa. For the monthly fares, the regional fare includes MTS bus and trolley and Sprinter and Breeze. The premium regional includes Flex and MTS's Rapid Express. The Sprinter Breeze Pass includes Sprinter and Breeze, as it says. And the coaster fares include all of those, including coaster service. So we have a 1-zone monthly pass, a 2-zone monthly pass, and a 3-zone. Typically, the senior disabled Medicare fare is half of what the regular fare is. But when the monthly fares were changed in 2008, the leadership at that time gave that population a steeper discount. So you'll notice that the Sprinter Breeze fare for SDM customers is only $19, and it's flat for all coaster zones. So we have a real opportunity there to maybe right-size some of those fares through this study. So in order to change the fares, we do have to go through a process that starts with studying potential scenarios. In summer, we began the data collection phase, and internally, we were developing some of the scenarios that we would like to see and would like to model. Then we kind of move on to outreach, where we're talking to the community, we're talking to our respective boards and committees to gather feedback about what we would like to see modeled. In the winter, we'll go back to MTS and NCTD's boards and discuss those potential fare changes. And at that time, the committees will recommend to the Transportation Committee what they would like to be considered and approved. If all of this happens and the Transportation Committee approves the fare change, we anticipate it will go into effect in summer of 2026. So this is where we're here now. We're here talking to you about the outreach that's been conducted so far and discussing the path forward for the rest of the fare change study. So NCTD, MTS, and Santag published a survey that was available beginning October 6th through November 7th. There were online and paper versions available, and really what we wanted to do is educate the public on the fare change study and talk to them about service levels in relation to the costs and what might happen if those revenues for NCTD remain flat while costs are increasing. And we also really wanted to find out how often people are riding, gather some demographic info, and then get their priorities about service levels, about fare levels, talk to them about discounts that were available, and see what they might want to change. And so I will pass it over to Tim to talk about the results of the survey.
Thank you, Mary. And actually, just before I get into the results, I'm just going to step back one more moment and kind of talk about why we did this particular survey. So we do, as Sandag, as other agencies, we're doing surveys kind of all the time of our transit riders, but there's really one, a really important one we do every 5 years called the onboard passenger survey. So the last time we did that one was in 2023, and onboard transit passenger survey. So we go out on every route in the region, we talk to riders, we figure out why they're riding, how often they ride, what their income, their demographics, those sorts of things. And that's a statistically representative sample that we collect of the region, and that's really important, and that's that data is super useful for creating the fare change model that I'll talk about in a little bit, or that Mary talked about originally. So we get a lot of good information from that, but we don't have questions in that survey about people's priorities for fare policies. So they're just aren't, we can't get that deep into those types of questions. So the survey that we did back in October and November, it did have a lot of those questions like Mary was talking about, so we get to learn more about what people's priorities are when it comes to fare policies. It's not a statistically representative sample, so we don't have, it's not perfectly representative of all the routes, all the riders, things like that. But we've included on the slide here demographics to show that in broad strokes, they're pretty, what we collected from this survey is pretty similar to our transit riders overall, but it's not going to have that statistical significance, that sort of precision that you would get in a different type of survey. So with that said, we've got over 5,700 responses in this survey, which is really great in just a month. That's a great response. I know I was out at Santa Fe Depot collecting, trying to get people to sign up for the survey. Other folks went out to different transit centers. It was posted online, so we had a lot of good advertisement, a lot of good responses on that. So starting with age, we decided not to focus on youth riders through this survey. So we don't have youth under age 18 in the sample here, but you can see the rider ages vary across ages, pretty good representation across all age groups. Second, in green, we've got 72% of riders in this survey live in households with fewer available vehicles compared to the number of people in the household. So a lot of people probably likely to ride transit pretty often. And then we also asked about household income in the previous year. The results are shown in the purple chart on the bottom. So 30% of respondents had an annual household income of less than $30,000. And 53%, so about half of the respondents, had an annual household income of less than $60,000 in the previous year. So we also asked respondents how often they ride transit, and this also helps us gauge who we're talking to and understanding if we have a good mix of current riders who are using the system really frequently. They're really like the backbone riders, and then also some less frequent riders. So you can see that 5 days a week was the most popular, most common response among our respondents, but we also had about 15% of riders who were using it pretty infrequently. So it's good to hear from them as well, understand what's holding them back from riding more and what would they like to see, what would get them riding more frequently. And then we had a mix of, or we had primarily a bus and trolley. If you look at like a regional transit ridership, bus and trolley, MTS in particular, does actually account for about 90% of overall transit ridership. And then there's other categories that we have in here that we also wanted to asking people what their most frequent transit service is. So about 5% Sprinter or Breeze, and about 5% Coaster. And that mostly lines up with about 10% of the region's ridership being on NCTD. And then I don't have a chart for this, but we also asked about what people use transit for the most, and about 50% use transit mainly for travel to work, 12% for major events like sports or concerts, 11% use it to get to school, and then 26% the rest of the respondents for other purposes mainly. So we asked respondents to consider the trade-off between maintaining transit services, for example, the number of transit routes that are in the system, how frequently they run, and then how early in the morning or how late at night they run. And then how would you compare that with the cost to ride transit or the transit fare? So taking that trade-off into consideration, which one would you rather have? Less transit service with no change in the cost to ride, or the same level of transit service but an increase in fare? And so we have this broken out by income levels. And so we see that a majority of respondents at all of those income levels that we have in the survey a majority of the respondents selected the same level of transit service with more cost to ride, indicating that most riders would rather pay more in fares rather than have their service be cut. So we see this as just a slight majority of 52% at the lowest income level, but it gets all the way up to 84% of respondents in the highest income category. So with that trade-off, there's a preference among those two. People would rather pay more than have service cut. We have a bit more here about fare policy preferences. So we have a survey presented a statement and asked respondents how much they agreed, disagreed, strongly disagreed with the statement, et cetera. So the first one is, if fares increase, it's better to increase only the cost for one-way and day passes. Those were shown on the chart on the left when Mary was presenting earlier. So the most common response from 28% of respondents was neither agree nor disagree, so kind of in the middle. We have the second chart in blue, so it shows responses to the statement. If we're increasing fares, it's better to increase the cost for monthly passes only. And so the most common response was disagree. It's important to consider that one-way and day passes on one hand and monthly passes on the other hand, they really work together in the San Diego region because we have a fare capping system. So Coaster is excluded from that, but for a lot of folks who are riding the bus, trolley, Sprinter, Breeze, you pay a certain number of one-way fares, and then once you hit the daily cap or the monthly cap, you stop being charged. And so if you make a change to the one-way or the day, or one-way and day cap, or the monthly cap, but you don't do one or the other, then you're going to have some kind of funky results. You're not going to have the same type of response when it comes to ridership and fare revenue that you would expect. It's not linear because the fare capping system is in place. And then we have the third chart in red, shows responses to the statement, if fares got more expensive, it would be better to increase costs over time rather than all at once. And so the most common responses here were agree and strongly agree. So the way we expect that this could work would be identifying and analyzing an ultimate fare scenario, saying maybe this is 2 to 3 years away, and then there might be 1 or 2 steps to get there. So like, for example, the current one-way fare is $2.50. Maybe you decide that it's $3 that we want to hit there in 2 years from now, and we'll do a $3 fare increase first, and then we get to $2.75, and then we get to $3. So basically making it a stepwise change, and we blunting the impact of that on the riders over time. And then we got one more slide here. So this is a slide with feedback on fare discount preferences. So we asked questions that asked respondents to consider the trade-off of providing fare discounts for some riders, even if that means that other riders need to pay more, because ultimately fare revenue, if you provide discounts, you're not really bringing in any more fare revenue necessarily. So the first chart in red shows responses to the statement. It's important to keep fares the same for senior and disabled riders, even if other transit riders have to pay more. And we saw the most common response was strongly agree, and then also a lot of support in the agree section as well. The second chart in blue shows responses to the statement, it's important to keep fares free for youth, even if transit riders have to pay more. And then most of our common responses also agree and strongly agree, but not quite as much support if we're comparing that to the senior and disabled Medicare fare. We also have a third chart in purple. This one shows responses to the statement, it's important to keep fares the same for low-income riders, even if other transit riders have to pay more. Most common response was strongly agree, and then agree was second. And I'll note that, and Mary mentioned this at the beginning of the presentation, senior disabled Medicare, that discount is already written into the Transnet ordinance that that needs to be provided, and there's Transnet funding to subsidize the transit agencies for having those as well. And then we also have the Youth Opportunity Pass, which is a pilot program currently funded through the end of fiscal year 26, but there's a plan to extend that for a few more years if possible. So those discounts already exist. The low-income program, there is no discount that currently exists for that. So that would need to be created if that was the direction, but it doesn't currently exist. And I'll also know that there's certainly overlap in some of the riders who qualify for one or more of these programs. For example, existing riders who are older or have a disability that might qualify for the low income if that existed, but they might already have the low income discount. And as Mary mentioned, the senior disabled Medicare discounts, especially for the monthly passes, is significantly reduced compared to the full price adult fare for the monthly passes. So yeah, just wanted to present these. This is what we got from the first round of survey results. And I think Mary's going to continue on with the presentation. Thanks.
Okay, so next steps. We've conducted the initial first round of public outreach, so now we're going to take the feedback that we received and have that inform the scenarios that we're going to put into Sandag's model to see what level of fare increase we'll have on our ridership. We kind of want to find the sweet spot. We don't want to raise fares too much and have it have a negative impact on our ridership, and then the fare revenue ends up remaining relatively the same. So once we have 2 or 3 scenarios nailed down that we want to present to the public, we'll go back out, we'll host community workshops, we'll talk to our boards and discuss those particular scenarios. And then we'll have our board and MTS's board make a recommendation of which one of the scenarios we would like to present to the Sandag Transportation Committee for their adoption. This is all anticipated to happen in the beginning half of 2026, with, as I mentioned, the goal of implementing these, at least, should the boards decide to do a phased implementation, the first phase or the entire fare change would be implemented around summer if we get all the approvals that are necessary. So Tim and I are available for any other questions that you may have.
Well, thank you both for the presentation. Taylor, do we have any public comments?
No, we do not.
Okay, thank you. Any of my colleagues? Yes. Vice Chair Edson.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. It was excellent. And I really particularly, when this was sent to us, enjoyed seeing the surveys because I am a visual person, and seeing these very easy to read charts are helpful. So senior disabled Medicare, can you remind me of what that age is to qualify?
65.
65, thank you. And the kind of final page of, you talked about the youth opportunity or youth fees increase or senior disabled fee increase. At the beginning, you mentioned that youth 18 and under were not surveyed, so they weren't included in this. So they didn't have any, so that's maybe why it's not as high as maybe the senior one, because I'm sure seniors were included in the other one.
Yeah, seniors were included, and yeah, you're right, that might explain some of the difference. We made a decision not to focus on youth 18 and under and exclude them from the survey, just because some of the, since youth 18 and under generally aren't, they're, in a lot of cases, they're not the primary breadwinners in the family, so they don't have as much control over like the household income. And so asking people about the preferences of would they rather pay more, but they're not the ones earning the income in a lot of cases, it just didn't really make a lot of sense to be asking them, because the level of priority isn't the same as somebody who's earning the money. So, and it's also just difficult to always get a good representative sample of under 18-year-olds, youth 18 and under as well. So, so that's the reason why. Yeah, that might explain some more. The support was more tepid, I guess, for that discount.
Well, as somebody who rode the bus growing up in order to get to extracurricular activities and anything else I wanted to go to, fun stuff. I mostly raised my own money, you know, whether it was allowance or doing chores or whatever. So I do think that they might weigh in a little, but I agree, parents still supplement quite a bit. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the presentation. Interesting results for sure. It's always, I feel like it's always nice to see surveys and how they work and what, you know, what we end up hearing. I have a few different questions. One was around, you know, obviously we're looking at wanting to increase costs and I feel like in general throughout throughout California and throughout the county, we're seeing increase in water prices, energy, a lot of different things, groceries, you know, just day-to-day expenses. So I guess I have two questions under this. One is around, do we look at what else is increasing in terms of rates and how do we stratify for that when we're looking at our costs? That's one. Maybe I'll stop there so I don't ask a double-barreled question. So I'll stop there and then I'll ask the other part.
Yeah, so that's part of the reason why we are going to be modeling multiple different scenarios. We will look at what levels of increase folks would be able to stomach. When we go out to the public and we have those 2 or 3 scenarios, we'll have a conversation with them about, we might get the feedback that this is too high, I won't be able to absorb this cost because eggs are higher or things like that. So yeah, it's part of coming up with multiple different scenarios that staff and our boards can consider in terms of the fare increase.
Okay, and I wonder if, and I'm assuming this is also part of it, where it's not necessarily for some folks whether or not they'd be able to, but whether or not they'd want to. I'm guessing that'll also be part of it. Like, is it worth me wanting to spend this money and then utilizing this mode of transit?
Or what?
I was just gonna say, as part of the data collection, we are looking at fares of our peer agencies. So we want to make sure that whatever fare increase we propose isn't exorbitantly out of line of what our peers are doing. For the coaster in particular, we're also looking at what zone structures look like for our peers. Do they have zones in other commuter rail agencies? How many? How do they really factor that into their fare ordinance? So we are trying to make sure that we are remaining relatively in line with what our peers are charging.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, and I appreciate the work that Sandag is doing through the surveys. The surveys sort of tell the story that, and I sort of liken it to conversations I've had in the past about free transit. Free transit's great until somebody doesn't want to pay for it, and then you have a 1-hour bus instead of a half-hour bus. And I think the conversation that has been had with the region is, are you willing to invest in continuing the service that exists? Because if you're not interested in that, sooner or later, we will have to reduce to 1-hour service on a half-hour bus or half-hour bus on a 15-minute bus. And those are conversations we really don't want to have. And I think by and large, and other places I've been as well, the community would prefer to have incremental increases to their contribution to the system so that they can maintain service levels. I think we've seen that a little bit here as well.
Yeah, definitely agree. And we know from there's been lots of research looking at the elasticity of ridership in response to prices. So we know that if the fare increases, you are going to lose some ridership. There's going to be probably some increase in revenue as well. So that's a trade-off that the boards would need to consider. But yeah, agree with everything.
Yeah, there are a lot of businesses too that get credits for having their employees utilize transit. And as a region, I think we need to make sure that we're providing that information to our past purchasers or riders of the system that, hey, you should go back to your employer and find out if they're part of a transit program that provides rebate or some type of a refund for utilization of transit to get to work, because there's a lot of money out there for that as well.
Okay, thank you. And then the other question was around, and you may have touched on this, but if you could reiterate in case you did, with regards to the survey response, can you tell me how many respondents there were and just a bit around, if you do, I don't know if you have the numbers, but just like demographics wise. I saw the some of the breakdown, but just curious, especially here for North County, if you have that breakdown, what that looks like.
In terms of geography or?
Honestly, it would be amazing to see everything, but because I'm a nerd in that sense. But yes, the geography sounds great. But I think also I'd love to hear age demographics, and I know we've been trying to figure out how do we outreach to the different demographics and everything. So I think it would be helpful to hear that piece too.
Yeah, sure. So we're definitely gonna release a full report that kind of goes into more details. I've got everything in the spreadsheet right now, so,
Okay.
so I don't have it right with me. The highest age group was I want to say it was like the 18 to 24 and 24 to 35, roughly like that. So it's younger adults was the more represented groups. When it came to ethnicity, I think we had more white riders compared to some non-white other people of other ethnicities. And we also, I believe, had slightly more older adult respondents than we do on the system than we have riders. So people may be a little bit more likely to be engaged in a public survey, just in general. And I think that's not that surprising. But we do plan to release a report that has more detail on the demographics. We didn't ask a question about people's location or zip code. We can infer some of that based on the service that they ride the most. If they ride a Breeze, the Sprint Coaster, they're probably going to be North County riders. So yeah, I don't have it in front of me, but we'll share more information.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's just helpful information just because as we start to think of ways, as we increase frequency and whatever else, and start to think of ways that we can get people to utilize these methods, it's just important to know who's already riding and who may not be, and then how do we get them to start riding, hopefully. So those are just things that I'm always thinking about. Obviously growing up here, you see the differences in terms of, is it going to be worth it to me to go and get this pass and then wait for an hour if I have another method to get down there? I think that's unfortunately some of the differences, right, in terms of the different regions. And so that's kind of where I'm okay, with North County, we have so much diversity in terms of who's here, that I'd love to be able to figure out how do we tap into folks that may not necessarily be utilizing public transit as their first way to get somewhere, but making it so that it is something that would be palatable and easier for folks to get around. So yeah, I think that's it. I did have one other question, but I believe you answered that. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Committee Member Contreras.
Thank you so much. When it comes to the funding that we get from fairs, right, just like the actual fair, you said it's very flexible. I mean, is it considered unrestricted?
It's revenues that we receive directly, so we can use it for whatever purpose we'd like.
Okay. And just have to make a comment regarding senior, disabled, Medicare, and youth. I think, we definitely have to keep discounts for the senior, disabled, Medicare population. Those folks are under a lot of stress financially. I'm a huge proponent of free transit for our youth with the continuance of the Youth Opportunity Pass. Those are just comments. But curious about the low income discount. So are there conversations about the threshold? And then also, what is the process to create that type of a discount, and where is that authority at?
Yeah, so I thought you were going to take it, Mike.
No.
So we actually, a low-income fare does not exist currently, so it would be something that the region would entirely have to stand up.
Right.
We can look to some of our peers and how they model it. Sean mentioned earlier to me that it could be based off of SNAP benefit eligibility. It could be, it would require an eligibility process, and I think the region would have to come together to set the floor for what would be considered low income in this region and who would be eligible for that pass. But it would be entirely new to the region.
Yeah, I would say the difficulty in this region that I've not had in other regions is, what is low income? I mean, we've had that conversation in relation to housing, right? Like, what is considered low income to other metropolitan areas is not necessarily
Yeah.
the case here.
Yeah, and you know what? So one of the things, obviously, that's difficult, right? Because so many people with the exorbitant cost of everything, if you're comparing wages or salary to that cost, you do see quite a lot of folks. But even just looking at the study, I'm wondering if there's a way to really hone in on extremely low income for some kind of a fair discount, if because it's really difficult to maintain these fares. But if we just look at the survey, folks that are making $14,999 or less feel that it's difficult, right, to make that assessment that they would pay more. And so I would just offer that we start to have those discussions, because I think it's less about how many folks qualify as a total number of folks, versus the folks that are going to be extremely impacted because they have an income where a 50% increase in their fare is such a high percentage of their take-home pay or benefits that they receive. So I would just offer that as a suggestion, that we really hone in on those folks that just have very limited financial flexibility. Yeah. And I know we've talked a lot about a flat fee for our coaster, a flat rate, and it hasn't materialized.
Talk about that.
So, is this out of the conversation? Is it
No,
still
it's
happening?
Absolutely still happening.
Okay.
I think
What's the project timeline for
well,
this?
I would say it falls in line with the fair study.
Okay, okay.
The thing that we're dealing with, which is not really an internal discussion, just sort of philosophically, is we have to find a sweet spot for what that is, right? Somewhere between $5 and $6.50, there's got to be like a spot. Yoon would love for it to be higher than $6.50, $11. But the thing that I want to be careful with is it's a long line. Should it really have two zones? Should it just be one flat rate? To me, I'm a big fan of simplicity. I like the flat rate idea. I think there's a lot of legitimacy to what's the midpoint, like what is really our service area that would dictate $1, or one fee, and then what is the secondary service area that might dictate sort of an upcharge on that. So that's kind of the internal dilemma that we're dealing with right now. But our plan is to have that worked out so it's all part of the fair study and fair phasing in plan that
Okay.
happens in '26.
Yeah, so Sandak has the challenge of not only modeling various fare increases, 3%, 5%, and 6%, but then also determining what that fare increase would look like with different zone configurations. So we're asking them to model, if we just have one coaster zone, you get on, you ride it, doesn't matter where you get on or off. We're also considering, as Sean mentioned, once you leave our service area, that's a separate fare, that's the second zone. We're also looking at distance. Do we include Solana Beach in zone 2, or do we keep it in zone 1? We're looking at various different scenarios.
Okay.
I really liked one, but we're gonna look at both just to see what the revenue would generate, what the ridership is telling us from the origin and destinations, the ridership patterns of coaster riders. We're looking at it all through this process.
Okay.
Yeah, and it is difficult, like when I'm on the platforms, one of the most frequent questions I get when somebody's at a TVM is at our vending machines is, what the heck is zone 1, 2, and 3?
Yeah.
Should I just get a day pass? And I always want to upsell, but I'm like, well, where are you going? If you're just going to Carlsbad, just get a zone 1 and we'll be good. And I think it's just easier to just say, this is the cost of riding the service. It'll be easier for Pronto, it'll be easier for packet sales.
Yeah,
all
there's
that
a lot,
stuff.
there is a lot of confusion around the zones, for sure. Okay, and also, I'm not sure if I got an answer to my question before, but the authority, where the authority rests to create any kind of discount system, I'm assuming that's Sandag? Or what?
Yeah, most likely. We haven't formally done a low-income discount before, but we are, in order to like the mechanism to actually implement a fare change is to make an amendment to the comprehensive fare ordinance. which is an authority that Sandag has.
Mhm.
So I expect that we'd be able to, that we would have the authority to do a low income discount. Our legal department would definitely check and confirm that.
Mhm.
But primarily, we want to know the direction from the recommended path from MTS and NCTD boards in order to do it. Sandag isn't like driving the process.
Yeah, of course. So what you would look for from this agency would be either a letter from the board or some kind of recommendation, which I would love to have that discussion if it's amendable to whoever creates the agendas. I think it's really important that we advocate. I again just have to underscore the 14,999 or less. I think we can zoom in right there and take a look at that. But thank you, that's important. And my last question is there a list of employers that we can see that have this rebate refund? And where can I find that?
Well, I would say we have a list of employers that buy passes from us at a discounted rate. I would say most employers have the opportunity to get tax rebates on public.
I mean, I think,
through-
do we market this? I think there's a lot of, like you said, there's opportunity here, but I don't even know where to look.
Yeah, I think we do. I think historically, when people bought a lot more passes prior to the Pronto system, that was something that was out there. Pronto system, I think in a lot of agencies are going through this, especially fare capping. In our quest to provide a system, there was a loss of revenue by creating that customer sort of inflection point for them, because historically people would just buy tons of monthly passes and then give them out to their employees, or they themselves would buy a monthly pass. What we found out now through the Pronto system is that people probably weren't writing enough to warrant the use of a monthly pass. And so we're seeing a little bit of a revenue reduction as a result of that.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering because since then we have, NCTD Plus, right? And we have these other things, and we might continue to have different types of services whereby I would think it would be important to resurrect this conversation and really look into that. But okay, that's all my questions. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And thank you. And before you escape, can you just, and maybe this, it's hard to believe I've been on the board now for a year, but this might be a newbie question, but can you put a little bit more color around how we would verify income, or even how we verify senior, disabled, and Medicare passengers now? I'm trying to visualize that myself. If you're at the machine, you're buying a ticket, I don't believe there's a process that says enter your income or any way to verify, right?
You're right, we do not. So how we do it for paratransit eligibility in particular is if you're eligible for our paratransit service, you have to go through an ADA eligibility process. So we contract out with ADA Ride is the contractor right now that provides that eligibility. Those riders are eligible for the Senior Disabled Medicare card. You can also you can go into a customer service office and get an SDM card. We'll check senior, obviously just your age, and then you can provide a Medicare card, or you can, all of our customer experience assistants are HIPAA certified. They go through a HIPAA training so they can handle those sensitive documents.
Okay.
We would probably emulate something like that for a low income discount. But it would be, if you're at a TVM and you're buying a pass, it's on our system.
Okay.
Yeah, I think on the surveys, the income level is voluntary, correct?
Yeah, that was voluntary. So I don't know the exact number of respondents to that question. We had 5,700 respondents total. I'd say maybe 4,000, roughly. I don't know, something like that. Probably responded to the income question. Not everyone's providing that income data, but we do have from our onboard survey where we have the statistically representative sample. We have a really good idea about writers and details from that survey as well. So we can get to some good estimates from one survey or another.
Are there other transit districts throughout California that we're aware of that has a program like that already?
Yes, yes, and we can provide more information about that. The challenge: each transit agency, each district has really different fare policies.
Yeah.
Day passes, monthly passes, fare capping or not. Some have an SDM, Senior Disabled Medicare discount, others don't. So there is really no direct comparison, but yes, there are some other agencies that do a low income discount.
Okay.
We haven't come across any that have the substantially discounted SDM discount, that would be kind of where we would expect there to be a lot of overlap in these riders.
I gotcha. Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Edson, you have another question?
Yes, just kind of circling back to Sean's answer to one of Priya's questions, which you mentioned targeting riders to encourage employers to participate in transit passes or fare reimbursements. I think I brought that up at the last board meeting, actually, but I'm wondering if also reaching out to chambers of commerce as well as reaching out to employers, because sometimes they get the message out to more people than just an individual employer.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I think historically we did that a lot because we sold a lot of monthly passes. I would say with the advent of Pronto, that's changed a little bit because we're not selling bulk passes. We're asking people to go to the Pronto system, so maybe they pay less than they would have in a fare capping scenario. So that's changed the game a little bit, but I think Brian wants to chime in on that.
Yeah, our TDM department at Sendag is a big proponent of doing that. And so they do like the tri-transit and the reach out to employers. They may have a database. You were asking, I think, about that, Councilman Contreras. Of some of it may be kind of sensitive. I think they know, we definitely have a list of all the employers that we contact. MTS and Entity do their own, like Sean mentioned, the discounts if an employer wants to buy them themselves. And a lot of them do that, but then there's a lot of employers who just let the employees buy them themselves and then pay them back. And our TDM department, they have the tri-transit where you can get I think a free month pass from them. If you just say, hey, I am an employee somewhere and I want to do this, they'll give you a transit pass, and they do a whole bunch of surveys and then try to find out do they still keep riding afterwards, things like that. So that's kind of their job. It's someone in our group, actually, Tim and I's group, who runs the TDM. So we can learn a little bit more about that. But it is a big thing in the region. It's part of our, I think, is the regional plan TDM policies to really try to get more employees riding.
So through the chair, excuse me, so employees can just say, I want to ride, and they get a free pass for a month or something like that to see if they actually do?
Yep.
Any employee, any person who works anywhere?
I hope I'm not lying, but yeah, I'm pretty sure that's how I don't know if Kalisa's listening to this, but yeah, it's subsidized through some sort of grant programs. I think CMAQ, congestion mitigation, air quality program type of a thing, where it's really trying to get, entice employees. I could follow up with you on that, but that's generally the idea is get them out there, get them try it for free and see if, it's like heroin, I guess. Give them that's what we're doing with the youth right now, right? Is get the youth to ride for free. And
Absolutely, absolutely. I just think it's really important to actually get out to those individual chambers. They have like monthly meetings or whatever. Have somebody present at some point, just like you come to our city councils to present, but presenting at city councils as well to talk, the more you get the word out, the more people know. So it spreads some daylight and people think, oh yeah, well, maybe I'll try taking the bus or taking the train.
We have a lot of service agencies at the chamber meetings too, right? Like, so you not only do you get the businesses, you get the business leaders in the community, you also get like first response agencies in the community that are at the chamber meetings as well. I find chamber meetings to be a really good place to throw some new stuff around and see if it sticks or not, because the business community will let you know right away whether or not they think that's a good idea.
So can you let Ms. Bennett know to ask the same question?
Absolutely. We'll make sure we
a little
plug that in
overlap.
for business.
And so we are a member of all of the chambers of commerce within the region, and we do attend, Tyler or I will go to the government affairs committees, so we are getting the information out. Also, for our FY26, marketing and advertising plan, we're gonna focus on just getting information out to the community about our services, period. Historically, we've geared it toward a particular campaign, whether it be Padres or Fair Tripper. We're still gonna do that, but we know that ridership is there. So we're gonna focus on trying to attract new riders and getting people just interested and providing them with information about the services that we provide.
Yeah, the chambers have been really receptive when we presented. I mean, they've been phenomenal, actually. Every chamber that we've gone to and had the opportunity to speak in front of, they've been great.
Well, again, through the chair, like FAQs, like a one-pager, would be really helpful for, for example, I am a chamber member in my city, but I also sit on my as a city council member, the business liaison committee for my city. And the top business leaders in my community generally attend that meeting. So it's a way to push it again. So maybe they don't even go to their own chamber meetings, they just pay their fee every year, but they don't go to the events necessarily or the luncheons. So again, word of mouth, right? The more we get it out there. Thanks.
Well, thank you all again for the presentation. Appreciate it. Okay. Moving on to our last item today, we have a presentation of the results of the calendar year 2025 internal audit program. Karen Toholsky will present this item. Karen, you have our attention.
Good afternoon and happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. This presentation is follow-up to the presentation that we had at the beginning of the calendar year, where we just gave you a brief overview about our internal audit program and shared the results of the calendar year 2024 internal audits with you. At that time, we provided information on the recommendations from those audits, and we're here today to provide you with some follow-up and status updates on where we're at with those recommendations. So starting off with the accounts payable operations audit, just a brief refresher, this was an overall audit of compliance with our policies and procedures for accounts payable, as well as just general operational effectiveness. We had a couple different chunks of recommendations, nothing, earth-shattering. The first set of recommendations followed around increased timeliness on processing of invoices. As you can see here, there were a couple of recommendations regarding leveraging use of technology to help remind staff if something's been sitting in their queue for a while waiting processing, and to make sure that as people transition out, things don't get lost in the electronic freeway trying to make it to their destination and get reassigned to somebody else. We are in process on our notifications in coordination with our folks over in information technology, and we should be ready to roll out into testing in the first quarter of 2026. The team has already completed the process to go ahead and make sure that as people transition out or move to different positions where they're not responsible for the invoices, that these are getting automatically reassigned to the proper individual, so we don't have that lag or loss in the system anymore. And then lastly, just focusing on enhancing training, that's in process as well, and we'll also be looking to complete that during the first quarter of 2026. The next couple recommendations was regard to the vendor master file function in our ERP system, and that's basically making sure that we had better documented procedures around the setups for the vendors, and then also for a general internal checks and balances, taking a look at limiting vendor master file to read-only access for finance division staff. So our team in procurement is done with their detailed job instructions. They have implemented those, and we now have a really tight process for the setup of all new vendors in the system. We are also in process with our J.D. Edwards consultant for programming needed to make those edits to the vendor master file. Like many things in technology, that one little function touches a lot of other things. So we do want to make sure that in our effort to change access for one group, we don't inadvertently cut off a whole bunch of other critical functions, and that's why we're making sure that we work closely with our consultant. And then last but not least, recommendations to develop some management reports and KPIs for our AP processing. That's also in process. This year, we implemented a new business intelligence department led by Mr. Alex Dennis back there under his team, and they've been doing a lot of great work over the last several months identifying areas for not only process improvement, but also reporting. And so they are going to be putting out a dashboard next year for our AP processing. I think they have probably a list, long. As soon as they started meeting with staff and saying, what would you like to see on a dashboard, they got besieged with requests. So this one is definitely in the queue for them as well. But again, they are a new department, so we need to give them a little bit of time to get their sea legs and get things up and running. The other audit that we had in calendar 2024 was our fare collection and enforcement audit. Again, looking at overall compliance with our policies, as well as just general internal effectiveness. First set of recommendations is just generally recommending that we look at our overall fare evasion figures and numbers, and maybe consider looking at some gated fare systems. We've had discussions with Chris Rio, our Director of Security, I know in other meetings, where she has shared all the increased work that their team is doing from the security end to help support fare collection out on our modes, out in the field. So we are continuing to emphasize that effort with her staff as well as with any of our frontline operators. And we are also looking for any potential for gated systems on the rail platforms as funding and project appropriateness may allow. Next item was in regards to daily cash handling procedures. First recommendation was that finance and customer service should get together and refine the daily cash handling procedures. That is done. They had very detailed procedures in place, and I can share that they are very successful. At the end of last year, there was only a variance of $25. So kudos to them. Really great work. I just wanted to throw that out there for context so folks didn't think we were losing a lot of revenue through cash handling. So kudos to the finance team and customer service team. The additional recommendation was to ensure that we had some redundancy in the fare collection revenue procedures, and Yoon and her team have done that as well. They have trained a couple of additional staff, and they are actively performing those tasks as well, so making sure that they stay fresh with them. And then last but definitely not least, there had been a recommendation regarding procedures for our lift fare collection. And with the in-housing of bus to NCTD, that has really already been covered off. Everything regarding lift fare collection is now handled under the existing NCTD procedures for cash fare collection documentation. That is it on those. We've been making some really great progress on those, and I think we'll see that wrap up over 2026. The last item that we had shared when we met back at the beginning of the year was just that we committed to take kind of a fresh look at our overall internal audit program charter, which we did. You all have been provided with a copy of the updated one with your package, and riveting reading. I know you've all spent all weekend reading it. Shared it with your family, put some coffees out on the coffee table. But in the past, we had two charters. There was kind of a general program one, and then there was a specific one for the PAF committee, and we thought, this isn't very effective. Nobody wants to try to compare two documents. So we basically merged them into a single document, which is the document that you have before you today. There was edited or deleted or anything like that. We just merged everything into one document, make sure that it flows nicely. We did also make sure that our audit industry references were updated to the most current standards. Really nothing's changed in those standards from that organization, but again, we are updating that we did reference the 2024 standards in our program, and then also we just generally updated the charter to make sure that it reflects the fact that we are now direct operations, references to contractors, operations, and those things have been removed, and then just updating titles, saying everybody with their current titles and what their responsibilities are accordingly. So that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Karen. Taylor, do we have any public comments on this?
No, we do not.
Okay, super. Any of my board colleagues have any comments or questions? Yes, Committee Member Contreras.
You know what? No, actually, it was very thorough. Thank you. I appreciate, combining the documents for efficiency's sake. And it looks like there is a staff recommendation for this. Are you looking for a vote? So I'll go ahead and make a motion to adopt the proposed revised internal audit program charter. Thank you so much for your work.
I would second that motion, and again, thank you. Good work. It looks like a pretty clean audit, so thank you.
Do we not need a? Okay, we don't need a motion.
Adopt.
I know it says. If I could just make a quick comment, one of the things that really impressed me when I first came on board almost 2 years ago was the absolutely phenomenal work that we do on an internal audit perspective. I think it's a combination of our finance team, our deputy CEO, Lori Winfrey's department, and especially Karen. I've not worked at a place that really has this level of internal auditing, and I think it's reflected in the zero findings triennial review we got. I think it's reflected in our continuous California Highway Patrol audits that we slam dunk. I mean, we just really have an outstanding group here that really takes the internal audit process seriously. both from a financial perspective and from a operational policy perspective. And so just wanted to make sure they got all the credit for that.
Great, thank you, Sean. And thank you again, Karen, and I look forward to getting maybe a quick, high-level kind of show and tell of the new dashboard when it comes out. Yep, great. Okay, just a couple announcements. Our next scheduled meetings are the executive committee meeting, which will be on December 18th, 2025 at noon. And then that will be followed by the regular board meeting also on December 18th, 2025 at 2 p.m. And this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you. This is Friday's day.